Comics Coast to Coast is brought to you by patrons like you. If you'd like to help the show out, head on over to patreon.com/comicsc2c and show us a little bit of your love. Your sweet, sweet love. I mean, like $1 worth of love. And we'll take that love and hug it and squeeze it and make it do podcast things that you'll enjoy. So come on, see what happens.
This is Comics Coast to Coast.
Hey everybody, this is Brian Dunaway, and you're listening to Comics Coast to Coast, episode 305, the Tony White interview. Before we talk to Tony, I'm going to introduce Joel Duggan of Starcrossed Online, which he prefers Forge Publishing now. Joel?
Well, it's not that I prefer Forge Publishing. I would prefer to have time to draw my comic.
I would prefer it as well.
There's only so much time in the day.
Right. I am fantastic. I'm glad to be back on the show. We had a little break there for a few weeks. Me and Matt filled in 1 week. We talked about Wonder Woman. I would love. Did we talk about Wonder Woman when you were here? Was that no? Wait, Joe.
Yeah, I was here for that.
Wait, it was. What did we talk about, Matt? When Joe wasn't here?
You were trying to convince me to read a certain comic book, and
yes.
Oh, Saga and something else is what you guys talked about.
Right. So, Matthew Ducharme, it's good to have you back as well.
Indeed. What is this place? What are we doing here?
What is this place?
What's this all about?
It is the thing where we get together and we either talk about something cartoony or we do the favorite thing we do, which is have great interviews, and tonight is no different. With us tonight, we have Tony White. Tony, how are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you. How are you guys?
Excellent. Tony, tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, first off, I'm a Libra.
Oh.
I like short walks on the beach, not long ones.
Yes, you like things to be in balance, right? That's the Libra thing.
No, I'm managing editor of Chapterhouse Comics. That just means that I have sort of an overview of our creator-owned line more than anything else. Before that, I edited a number of the comics that we do, like Captain Canuck, All New Classic Captain Canuck, Northgard, the Chapterhouse Summer Special, Die Kitty Die, the Free Comic Book Day issue that we just had out this year. I'm sure I'm missing something, but
right.
Yeah. So that's what I do.
That's great. Hey, let me ask you. I always feel like Free Comic Book Day happens a couple of times a year. When's the official? Is there a different day for Canada versus the U.S., or is it all the same Free Comic Book Day?
Same. It's all the first Saturday of May, and then there is a second one, Halloween Comic Fest, I believe they call it. October. So it kind of looks like you have two Free Comic Book Days, but one is really targeted towards people buying those little packages of comics to give out at the door, and then they try to tack on like a Free Comic Book Day with that.
Right.
But the real Free Comic Book Day event is the first Saturday of May each year.
Interesting. Favorite free comic book? Anybody have a favorite that you got for free? That's a tough question. Might let you think about it for a minute.
I'm sure I'm picturing something that was fantasy based. There was some fairies, but I can't remember the name of it. I'm sure I've kept it. It's around here somewhere, but my entire apartment is still in boxes, so I don't know.
No, we won't ask Tony to answer that because it may be a conflict of interest for his editing job, right?
I would have to say the Captain Canuck Free Comic Book Day issue with the Die Kitty Die backup story. So
there you go. That's buying in.
But yes, no, there was quite a few good ones out there. I took my kids down and we picked up. I try not to pick up a bunch of them. I try and only pick up the ones that I'm kind of really, really curious in, and then let them get theirs because these guys pay for the comic books. I try not to turn into a. What's the Orange Lantern guy? Larfleeze. I try not to turn into Larfleeze where everything is mine.
It is mine. That's a great comparison. I'm the same way. That's what I like about the free digital comics that I always pick up. I try to add those to my Comixology account because I'm not really. Am I costing anybody anything? I don't know. I don't think I am. I hope not.
If it ends up on there, they want you to read it. Like, we put our Free Comic Book Day issue up on our Comixology. The last two that we did, we had one in 2015 and one this year.
Right.
And we just want people to read them perhaps get interested in the character and then look for more. So if it's up for free, you're not costing anybody any money. And I think that's the best way to get them. You can put them up anywhere from a month after the date up on Comixology or whatever your digital platform is. You can put them up for free after that. But for the first month, I believe, Diamond doesn't really like you to share them out.
Makes sense.
Funny, like I never thought about that. In a world where everybody watches free YouTube videos, you can get a lot of media online for free or very close to free. But you're still, paying for digital comic books, which I'm happy to do. Excuse me, but I think, having that kind of free trial or that free issue to try and get to know the character and see if you want to actually buy, a comic is really smart. I haven't been reading digital comics in a long time, so I completely forgot that Free Comic Book Day would also have translated to online.
Yeah, not everybody puts theirs up there, but there are a fair number of them. If you go into Comixology's free section, you'll see Free Comic Book Day issues from the past, 4 or 5 years.
Nice.
Yeah, and people and certain companies do a lot. Like Comixology is they kind of don't like you putting up a bunch of free stuff, but they don't mind you putting up your Free Comic Book Day issue or having one particular issue of a large series for free to get people interested.
Right.
But they like to have a little bit in their free stuff, but they don't like to see you do too much of it.
Right. Because then where do you have the people like me who comes in and goes, "Hey, Brian, give us $5.99 a month so you can read all you want." And I'm like, okay. And that's what I do.
Comixology Unlimited is great that way, as is Comic Blitz. I mean, Comic Blitz doesn't have Marvel or DC in it, but it has a large selection of indie comics as well.
Comic Blitz. I'm not familiar with that one. Is that app driven as well, or is it?
It is. Yeah, it's an app. It's on. It's available on iTunes and Google Play, I believe.
Right.
You can also read them through the browser.
Interesting. I'm going to have to download that right now. But while I'm doing that, be sure, dear listener, to go to chapterhouse.ca to see where Tony spends most of his days, I'm assuming.
Right there on that page.
No, right there on that page. He sits there right in front of that computer screen all day. And also follow Tony as Canuck Tony, or is it Canuck? How do you say it?
Canuck.
Canuck.
You can say it. So long as you're saying it, I don't care how you say it. It's, Canuck or Canuck. People from different areas say Canuck, but we say Canuck. That's
right.
all.
Makes sense. That's Twitter. Canuck Tony. Do follow him on Twitter. He is quite entertaining. And Tony has been watching a lot of movies lately, but we might talk about that later. But I've been watching his feed, and he's been giving me some gems on what to do with my movie going times. He has a whole list of his top favorites. Now I want to talk about it in a little bit, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. First, I would like to hear you tell us more about your exciting adventures with Canada's favorite superhero, Captain Canuck. You did this before you went and worked at Chapterhouse, right? You were doing stuff directly with it.
Yeah, I was just I was a guy who just had a certificate in social media marketing and whatnot, and I worked a different job. But a friend of mine had seen a job posting for Captain Canuck. They were looking for someone to work with them at conventions and in their office, and it was really non-specific as to what they were looking for. And she told me about it. And she's in Jacksonville, Florida.
Right.
Of all places. I didn't see this, of course, and it's Canadian, but she did. But yeah, so she told me about it, and I said, no, they're in Toronto. I'm not going to Toronto. It's a nice place to visit. It's a nice place to visit, but I don't think I'm going to move my whole family up, even if they wanted me, which I don't think they would.
Right.
So anyways, she kept bugging me, and I did eventually send an email, and a few weeks later, I got a reply, and they said, hey, we're coming to Halifax for HalCon, which is our local convention here. It's the biggest one east of Quebec.
Right.
And they said, we'd like you to come meet us and work with us for the weekend, and we'll take it from there. So I went out and I visited them and got to meet them. I met Richard Cumley, the creator of Captain Canuck, and Fadi Hakim, who has the creator. He's the president of Captain Canuck Incorporated, but he also is the founder and CEO of Chapterhouse Comics.
Nice.
Yeah, I met them, and I met Kalman Andrzejowski, who's the current writer on Captain Canuck and our editor-in-chief. And, we sort of hung out over the weekend. They made me get into the suit. So I spent a lot. I spent a lot of time on Saturday and Sunday at the convention in the Captain Canuck suit.
That's awesome. So, okay, so I got to know a little context there, because I got to know Are you a fit man? Do you fill that costume out nicely? Because if I got in that costume, people would be disappointed.
No, I'm fit.
Right.
I'm athletic looking, I guess, with a slight beer enjoyment area. But for the most part, I'm quite fit and slender. I can fit into it. I could fit into it a lot better. 3 years ago than I can now.
I can vouch for Tony's athleticism.
Nice.
We spent a good solid weekend as table neighbors at Spring Equinox here in Halifax.
Nice.
There was a lot of comic lifting. There was a lot of standing up and sitting down. There was a lot of standing when you were tired of sitting. And felt the man can fit into the Captain Canuck suit.
That's great.
Oh, thanks.
Now,
we had a good weekend, anyways, and I think we're going again at Decaf. We'll probably be close to each other.
I'm going to see you, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, something like that.
The 13th.
Wow.
3 weeks or so, I think. Yeah.
Right around the corner. Literally, Canadians. Hey, you know who I like better than Captain Canuck? The Guardian from Alpha Flight, but I guess that's kind of America, Canada, right? And not Canada, Canada?
Yeah. I mean, he was originally created as Weapon Alpha, and I think that was
right.
Chris Claremont. It was a Chris Claremont story,
right?
And then John Byrne sort of fleshed him out, or helped him flesh him out at that point. But I got actually an interesting story about that. This came from the creator of Captain Canuck, so and he was telling it to somebody else, and I overheard. So this may not be entirely true.
That's my favorite kind of stories, though.
So back in 1975, he and Ron Leishman created Captain Canuck. A couple of years later, he gets a letter from Marvel basically saying, hey, we saw your character. We like him. We're building a Canadian team. We'd like to license your character to be in Marvel and be the leader of Alpha Flight. And I guess Richard thought about it a little bit, but he didn't want to lose control over his own character.
Right.
So he said no. And so that's when they decided to come up with the character Weapon Alpha, who was, a year later showed up again in X-Men with Alpha
Which
Flight.
looks nothing like Captain Canuck. Nothing.
No, nothing at all. So they created the character basically to fill that gap because they had somebody that they were going to put in that role, and they decided, since they couldn't get him, that they would build a character with different powers, but with a sort of similar flag motif.
Right. It's hard to argue. I mean, it's the maple leaf on the Canadian flag, so I guess they got a little bit of protection there, right? They can kind of go, what else are you gonna do?
Richard's a super nice guy. It's not like he would send them a cease and desist or anything. He was just, he saw it and he said, that looks really similar.
Right.
He didn't take it the wrong way. He just said, well, good for them. Obviously they needed to go in that direction, and that was
That's great. I hope that I could be so gracious.
Richard is a super nice guy. Actually, everybody I work with is fantastic. I got to say, I have great respect for Richard. I have great respect for Fatty. I mean, these guys are building something from virtually nothing up here. So it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
How long has Chapterhouse been around?
So Chapterhouse came about, again, I joined the company in 2014. Chapterhouse was being talked about at HalCon. I think it was actually finalized at the beginning of 2015. And our first issue with the Chapterhouse logo on it was the Free Comic Book Day issue that came out on the first Saturday of May of that year, the Captain Canuck #0.
Right.
Wow. So the company itself, I mean, even though it was a fledgling idea, you're still looking at 2 to 3 years old.
Yeah, it's about 2. From the first time we published an issue, it's been about 2 years, 3 months, and some. Yeah. So, but the company itself, I guess it's been around for about 2.5 years.
Still, though, I mean, a lot of times, that's like that. That's the fight or flight kind of area for new companies, right? It's cool to see that it's still going, and obviously still going strong.
Yeah, well, we just had some big news come out recently about Jay Baruchel. He purchased into the company. He's a part owner and our new CCO. Chief
excellent.
Officer. So yeah, he brings a lot of enthusiasm with him, plus a small team of his own and some connections to, the entertainment industry that will be helpful in getting animation done and live action done eventually in the future.
That's it. Yeah, that's super exciting. I saw that and I was like, oh no way, that is great. I remember him best from Tropic Thunder, is Sandusky. So you don't give him a hard time about that, do you? You don't give him a hard time about his acting.
I'm a fan. I mean, he's been super nice to me. The first time I met him was just at Montreal Comic Con recently. I've spoken to him through email and through Twitter. But the first time I met him in person was actually at Montreal Comic Con. On Friday before the doors opened, and he just walked right up, and I went to shake his hand, and he went in for the hug, and I was just like,
"Oh, that's nice."
Should I be touching him? This is Dave Baritone. Anybody? Should I be touching him?
I knew it. Am I getting tackled? You know you're gonna get tackled for that, right? You just know it's not gonna end well. But
he whispered in my ear, "One-way hug." Oh, okay. No, he didn't. No, he was fantastic. Just enthusiastic about it, and he's just excited about Canadian comics. Right. He wrote that free comic. He co-wrote the free comic book day issue Captain Canuck story this year. Right. With Calman. So it was his first comic story that he's written, and he's writing 3 more parts to go along with it right now.
That's great.
Right on. So it's cool to see that. I mean, obviously, a lot of people would know him as an actor, but he's obviously got some other creative, endeavors and interests.
Oh, writer, director. I mean, he wrote both Goon movies. I think he directed the last one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's obviously been in several different movies and TV shows, or I don't know how many TV shows. I just know Man Seeking Woman on FXX.
Right.
But This Is the End, and his Goon movies, Tropic Thunder. He's everywhere. He just suddenly shows up, and you're like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. He'd be here.
Right.
Yeah.
I mostly know him from the comedies and stuff. He does a voice. He does some voice work as well, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
Does. How to Train Your Dragon. Yeah.
That's it. I knew it was from somewhere. Now, which was that? Who is he in that? Is he the main? He's the main guy, right?
He's the main character.
guy.
Yeah, he's Hiccup, right?
Hiccup's the dragon.
No, he's the trainer for the dragon. I cannot remember the character's name, but it looks like a younger him.
Right.
The animation they did, it looks like dark hair. He's slim and tall for his age, he looks similar to Jay actually. But yeah, he's the voice of that character in How to Train Your Dragon. Well,
I'm looking forward to learning more about his creator side coming up. I would love to see his writing. You said that he's done some writing for which book was it again?
The Captain Canuck free comic book day issue.
Okay.
He did the Captain Canuck year 1 story that starts there, and he'll be releasing two more issues of that, one in the fall and one in the spring.
Right. Now, can I pick up that digitally on Comixology, or is there a Chapterhouse direct something that I can do? Can I still get my hands on any of that kind of stuff? Or
that free comic book day issue, I don't believe it's actually available on the Comixology yet, but it's going to be. It had been uploaded, but there's a delay.
Right.
On you submit it, and you need 3 to 4 weeks before they upload it. So
excellent.
I would suspect I put it in late, so it was probably the next week or 2. I haven't got any notification saying it's going up, but very soon.
That's great.
Yeah. Just before we completely lose track, Hiccup is the name of the character that Jay plays. Toothless is the dragon.
Oh,
I was confused. Hiccup is the kid. He's the main kid.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking about. I
totally had that wrong. It's been a long time since I've seen those movies.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So during the daytimes, Tony. So you're doing your editing job. We have a lot of young content creators who listen to this podcast. So they're probably going to know who's the biggest pain in your side when it comes to editing. Now, you don't have to answer that. As an editor, what things as a creator do you need the creator to look at before they give it to you? What should they avoid having to have long discussions with you?
Really, everybody I've worked with have been fantastic. And the most difficult stuff I'd say I run into would be, time allotment. People not using their time as well as they probably could have, or being more busy than they actually, more busy than they can actually accomplish in that run of time, which is nobody's fault, really. They need to work to feed themselves, so you've got to make sure that you've got enough work to do that. So I can't complain in the least if they run a little bit behind.
Right.
I'm probably the biggest problem is probably me, because I take time to go through things very, very specifically, and it takes me longer to, because I want to be thorough. I want to hit all the marks right away without having to go back through and say, oh yeah, you know what, I missed this and this and this. Can you do this too? You know, and after I've already given them notes, I want to give them complete notes before it goes back to them.
That's funny. So as a content creator, I've always, I depend upon someone to look at my work, an editor, and I've always kind of viewed them as, an obstacle between me and getting my product out. But you're really the last line of defense before I make a mistake, right? You want to make sure that I'm putting my best foot forward. So
yeah, you want to make sure that what you're putting out there is appropriate for the audience that you're putting it out there for. You want to make sure that it reads like you meant it to.
Right.
That you're not missing words, that you're not saying something that somebody could perceive that you may not notice, but somebody else may perceive as inappropriate. Sometimes you just need somebody else to look at and go, yeah, I would reword that to say this instead. Or, you missed an entire speech bubble here. Like at the final, the letterer could miss an entire speech bubble, and you're like, what's going on there? There's who's he talking to? Who's he answering? And it happens. It happens all the way through. I see layouts, and we tweak the layouts, get the pencils or the inks over top of those, and then you're like, wait a second, the script called for this. We're like missing an entire panel. You got to go back.
Oh yeah.
You got to fix it because there's a whole section that makes sense. Or sometimes you can say, well, it was not really needed. Let's just add this to this panel. We'll drop that anyway. You can fix a lot of things by modifying it, but probably one of the biggest things I notice is people taking liberties with the script without actually discussing it with the editor or even the writer, just to see, because there may be a reason. That may be there for a reason later on, and they eliminate that panel. You're like, well, this explains 2 pages from now why they fall over, or something. And it's just not there because they said, I don't need that. I want to make this panel bigger, so I'll get rid of that panel. It seems useless.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to get destroyed.
So I've seen a few people take liberties like that, and it's a little bit of a pain, but it's not the end of the world.
Yes, it's a lot different working with yourself and for yourself and working with a team. You have to really stick to the plan when you're working as a team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good times. That's good advice.
Do you find that you run into more hurdles or less when you're dealing with like a writer, pencil, ink, color, or if you're dealing with just one person that kind of is doing all the things?
Maybe it depends on the experience. Depends on the experience that those particular people have or that person has.
Right.
When you're dealing with somebody with their own project, it's their own creator-owned work, and they want you to help it with the editing portion of it, or it needs that. Then sometimes they don't like people meddling in their characters and their little world, and I totally respect that.
Right.
It's not very often that you come to heads with somebody like that, because I'm there to make suggestions. I'm there to keep stuff from if it's meant for a kid who's 12 years old, making sure that there's not stuff in there that's meant for a kid who's 17 years old.
Right.
I'm also there to make sure that the story makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then we have to make it make sense. And if the visuals are not telling the story that is in the script, well, we have to take care of that and make sure that it does. There has to be a good fluid storytelling experience to make sure that your book is top notch. So we're not there to police you. We're there to enhance you.
Right. Yeah, it's more of a partnership than it is to handing in your school assignment to a teacher and waiting for corrections, right?
Truly, my name is on there too, right? So
right.
I don't want to be attached to a book that I don't really think is the best possible book that could be out there. And I make mistakes too. I mean, every editor makes mistakes. They miss stuff. I mean, you can look at any Marvel, DC, Image, Boom, Dynamite book, and you will find, certain ones have issues that were missed by writer, artist, editor, assistant editor, and publisher, whoever else is looking over it, graphic designer, and you're like, how did they all miss that?
Yeah,
they just do. It's
nothing makes me
one person.
Nothing makes me scratch my head than reading a book that's like in its third publishing and finding a typo. I'm like, how in the world has this typo lasted this long through a third publishing? It blows my mind. But yeah, I think editors, they get blamed when things get through. So good on you. Good on you for
treated
being
as the hall monitors of the
right.
publishing industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Whose fault was it? It was the editor's fault. He should have called it. He's supposed to be infallible. All right, so
Editor of comics, is that like the goalie of soccer, kind of thing? You only
I
get
think
blamed if you do your job wrong.
right.
Oh, that's definitely equatable. I would say maybe the manager of the team,
Yeah,
the guy who when the team loses, it all it kind of rolls uphill.
it does.
Yeah. They don't follow the star quarterback or fire the star quarterback. They fire the guy that's managing the team.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You put him in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. What's the evolution of a relationship with the creators? Do most creators which you came into, do they seem to love you right away, or is it they're a little apprehensive about you a little bit, or?
I'm pretty lovable generally.
Pretty
so
lovable. Well, we love you here on the show. I think you got a great personality. I think that you are I think you would be the perfect editor. You have a great personality for it.
Well, thank you. I've worked with a number of people that I'm still friendly with, so I guess it's
Right.
working out so far. But yeah, the evolution. I would say most people who have any experience in the business expect an editor to be a little bit hard on them and to actually provide really good notes and maybe suggestions. And when I started out, I was probably not as strong at making story suggestions or changes as I was simply doing line editing. So I would say my progression's gotten to the point where I'm a little bit better at what I do. And for the most part, I've grown through exposure to all the great talent I've gotten to work with. So I think for the most part, the evolution on my particular skill set now, my evolution in that is based purely on the people I've worked with now.
Right.
I don't know if a lot of them, most people I've worked with have worked with editors before, so it's not like I'm bringing in somebody new who's never. I've had a few guys who had very, very little experience in the business.
Right.
Working with me, so there was a little bit of a challenge there where I was relatively newish and they were relatively newish, and I was taking notes from some of the other people I work with, like, what do I do here, and I was learning and growing with them.
Right. Interesting. Matt, I haven't heard a lot from you, but I do see that you have a question in the show docs.
Actually, a different one occurred to me as I was listening, because I've personally never done any of the comics in the comics world. I have only the vaguest clue what an editor does. He's been educating us. But I have a question. How often do you appear in the process of a comic book? Like, are you seeing the script, and then are you seeing the pencils, and then the inks? Or is it just like you get one shot at it?
No, most of them I see every stage. So when I was working on Captain Canuck and All New and Northgard, those are our books. Those are our licensed characters. So we see that from stage, from script to layouts to pencils to inks to colors and lettering, and then the layouts and the pagination. Like every single stage I have to sign off on.
Interesting.
So I have to look at the script, and then, for the most part, early on, I wasn't making a lot of script suggestions. I was mainly saying, this doesn't seem to fit here. This is missing something. There's a couple of typos here before they ever get to the letterer. So early on, there wasn't a lot of story that I was adjusting. Right. And then as I got more comfortable in it, I started doing that. But it would go from the script, and then I would see the layouts, and I would go to the script and talk with the writer, and we would go over, and if this works, okay, this works, the layouts work, let's move ahead. So, from that point, you're just basically they're just going through the motions of filling in the each and every panel. So when you get to lines, it's a little bit easier to see where you're missing things. So when you're doing inking, you could say, oh yeah, you know what, that's supposed to be, let's say, Quebec. She's supposed to be Quebec in that, and she's not there. So we have to add her in after the fact. So you get little things like that. And then when you get to colors, sometimes there's, we've had a lot of colors, that have come through, and they're great, but there's always a little bit of tweaking to do because, they get the CMYK specs, and sometimes the color they use the same color where they're not supposed to use the same color. It's slightly different
Right,
red, or
right.
it's a maroon, or they put the wrong color. His helmet is very specific. It has little red bars on the side and white, and so sometimes they put the wrong colors in the wrong areas, and it's like little things, and you really have to go over it like really, really carefully before you miss it.
Now, do you think,
lettering.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, and the lettering stage is probably the most important stage,
Right.
because you can, once you've gone through all of that, even if you have something that's missing a character, they could always be off panel. But if you get somewhere where the story doesn't really flow, you can sort of fix it in lettering. Oh, we missed this.
Right,
so we
right.
can fix it in lettering. Lettering is probably the most important stage. You want to make sure that all of your sound effects match and they look right, and you want to make sure that your tails are trailing to the right people, and that you aren't missing any words, or there's a lot of little issues that can go wrong when you're lettering, because they're doing it quickly, right? Usually,
Right.
Unfortunately, the letterist is the last person to see that stuff, and it's usually in a rush. I've gotten to the point now where I basically give the letterer the inks, and I say,
Right.
create a layer, and then once we get the coloring done, you can we'll tweak the layer while the coloring's being done. We'll know that the lettering's perfect. You can just slap it over top, and away we go. So you're not killing 2 or 3 days while he does his lettering.
Interesting. Something I didn't think about a letterer. They can save your butt. That's great.
Yeah.
I have new respect for a letterer. Thank you for that, Tony.
Yeah. What I was going to ask was when it comes to stuff like that, like is there? I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. When it comes to those kind of little mistakes that a colorist would make, in terms of red bars when they're not supposed to be red bars, do you think that some of that is due to the amount of work that most artists kind of have to take on in order to make ends meet? Like this, it's not like, oh, this is my one gig, this is all I have to do, and everything's fine. It's like, no, this is like the 4th book I'm coloring this month, and like whenever I'm talking to people these days, especially a lot of the artists that I've been talking to lately. Years ago, it was, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. And it's the default answer. And people say that regardless of whether they're good or bad. But now the word busy has been inserted into, I'm good, I'm busy, but I'm good. And it's all like eye-rolling busy, because, and it doesn't matter whether it's, someone that works in retail, or whether it's my mom, or whether it's a student or another artist. Everybody is just so damn busy all the time. And I'm asking because I noticed this about myself. It didn't happen, but it came very close to happening. I was dealing with a client in June, and I was just so busy, quote unquote, before going on vacation. And I had so many plates in the air that I nearly dropped one. And in 15 years as an illustrator and as a freelancer, I've not gotten fired from a client by being, a crappy artist, like a crappy business person. But I came close and I felt terrible. And it was pure, just not enough bandwidth for all the stuff that I needed to do in order to make, my vacation happen, or, meet these deadlines. So I'm just wondering, like, have you seen any kind of change either from dealing with different artists that might have different, kind of, I guess, experience, as you mentioned, and revenue streams, or are those mistakes, more in terms of like personality and just like the kind of artist that you're dealing with, as opposed to like their workload?
I think it's twofold. I think a lot of the times it's just they are very, very busy, and they are cramming in 16-hour days doing artwork, or they're the type of person who works a second job and they do artwork, like they do coloring, or they do penciling, and they do inking on the side. They do lettering on the side, so they spend 8 hours a day at a regular job. They come home, they spend another 8 hours doing work for comic books, which is both, it's commendable, but it's terrible that they have to work a day job in order to, basically feed their comic addiction.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a mixture of being far too busy with the amount of work they have to do, and it's unfortunate, but that's just the business. Or having a little bit of what is it? They're just new to the job. Like they aren't really that familiar with the characters or how the lines goes, and you can give people samples. They don't necessarily always go back to them. They're just okay, this looks right, and then they move on to the next thing again, probably because they're so busy and just trying to get the job done.
Right.
So little things get missed a little bit.
Interesting. That's so yeah. Not only are you editor, your babysitter. Is that what I'm hearing, Joel? Having a babysitter?
No, that's not quite what I was getting at. No, I'm just curious because I find that, I mean, as I'm working with other artists myself, I mean, one of my goals with Forge is to try and alleviate some of that pressure by helping them kind of create their own thing that they own the IP for, so that there's less saying yes to every job and more taking the good paying, the good jobs, the ones that are planning time, and as opposed to the last minute. Because I mean, 15 years in and I still get requests for people, to have commissions like, hey, can you do this for me? Like, it's my friend's retiring, and it's like, sweet, when is he retiring? Tuesday. Like, well, how long have you known that he's been retiring? Because I'd like to take this job, and there's always those factors of like, well, it's a lot of money, but it's like, but it's Tuesday. It's like, I'd like, it still happens, and I'm just wondering if there's a way that, is there anything like kind of within Chapterhouse or anything that you've seen in the industry that is working towards kind of remedying that workload that
That's
a lot of artists have to take on?
Well, you can only do so much. I mean, sales being what they are, you've got to budget for what you think your book is going to sell.
Right.
So if your book's going to sell 3,500 copies, then you have to budget based on that money that's coming in. So, it all comes down to budgeting. Larger companies can pay a lot more. Smaller companies can't pay as much. So sometimes they pay a little bit less, and not necessarily the artwork suffers for it, because we have probably decent rates, but we bring in a lot of newer people to sort of give them a chance. Like we try and hire Canadian. We do have some people in Italy. We have some people in Brazil. We do have some people in the U.S. But primarily, we try and work with Canadian creators and give them a leg up, because if they get some published work, they can move on to a larger company, perhaps, or eventually maybe we'll be that larger company for them. But if they have published work, it's a little easier for them to become freelancers for, say, Image or Marvel or DC. But yeah, as far as that goes, all we can do is give them the work at the rate that we can afford to do it, and then hopefully, we help them move along a little bit further.
There's such the problem, of course, is it all comes in economics. I mean, it's tough to put out the number of comics that you need out there at the price point people are willing to pay, at the quality people expect. It's just, that's a tough balancing act to have, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can see it with the larger companies. I mean, their cancellations are at much higher numbers than we consider cancellations. Even Image, I think they don't cancel anything unless it drops below 6,000. Marvel and DC tend to do so once they drop below 2025. So I don't know.
I guess when consumers consider a comic book worth the amount of money that would be required to give an artist the leisure of creating something slowly, I think maybe we could see something at that point. But I'm not willing to. I'm not willing to spend $50 for a comic book. No,
I mean, comic books are expensive as they are now, but there's a lot of work in them. So I don't know. Right. I don't know where the balance is. Maybe the industry, as it seems to be doing, switches from floppies to trades to graphic novels to larger, thicker books. You can spend longer creating them. Right. You're only putting out the one.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's a different dollar value. When someone's buying something that's 120 pages, you're more apt to spend 10 or 15 or even $20 on something like that, as opposed to something that's 22 pages and then they're asking $4 to $5. It's like, well, I would rather wait and have a big, experience, because as the few comics that I've been reading as an adult, I find that if I am reading something that's just a regular floppy, I'm through it so fast, and it's like, that was over really, really quick.
Right.
It's a lot faster than what I remember when I was a kid. So, and that's one of the reasons why I gravitate towards trades, is just because, like, it's a lot easier to to digest them. Like you can sit down and really enjoy a graphic novel or something like that. The books that I tend to buy tend to be more independent now too, and maybe that's just because I'm an independent artist, and it's like, well, I can read that stuff, from the big collection of like Hush, Batman, and like that's the thing. Or I could spend my $20 on this person that, granted, they're published, but like this is their creator-owned book, and like that kind of stuff to me is usually a little bit more appealing. But that could be just my personality.
I don't know. I think you and I are very close in age, and I think what it is that we grew up with these groundbreaking books, or what we seemingly thought were groundbreaking books at the time. And now it's just that we've read all of those stories. We've been reading them for 30, 40 years, and they're kind of they're rehashing with different characters, not necessarily different characters, but for a different era. And now we can just go look for something a little bit different that's a little bit more mature for our age group. Like, for instance, as Spider-Man is 15, my Spider-Man is married. But I prefer I prefer the Image, and I prefer Dynamite, and I prefer Dark Horse, and I prefer Chapterhouse, and I prefer Boom. I find stuff there to be a little bit more. It's a little different, and it's a little bit more my speed.
Right, and
it talks to me more.
Right. Plus, I'm with Jolis. It used to seem like it took longer to read comics as a kid. One thing is we probably did read slower, but I feel like they were a lot more dialogue heavy. I mean, everything, there was probably, most of the comics I was reading would have, I don't know, at least 7 or 8 panels. But now you got these big spreads, and it didn't take half a second to read a spread. It's like, oh, sweet. That was 2 words of dialogue. Next page. And it's fun to dig into that artwork, but they do seem to move pretty quick. And as consumers, we go, oh, I just spent $5 on something that took me literally 10 minutes to read. And we have to look and go, that wasn't a good deal. That was not a good spending of my money.
Well, we're not getting a full arc either. You're getting 22 pages. You're not getting a full arc, so you're not getting a really good feel for the book itself anyway.
Right.
So I feel personally, if I don't have that 4 or 5 issues, it's kind of like watching TV shows. If I don't give it 3 or 4 episodes, I generally don't really love it until I've gotten really invested in the characters. And I don't think you can do that in one single issue. So we're talking about binge reading, right? That's what we're doing.
Yeah. And that was the next point I was going to make. Like, I'm wondering how much services that are as everywhere as Netflix are influencing the way that people read. Because if you're just used to being able to see all of this stuff and be able to watch like House of Cards in one fat go, then maybe that's the way that people are preferring to consume all media. And it's just that, comics and stuff like that are slower to catch up.
Well, look at the influence of trades and graphic novels just in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, there's more of them out there. They're accessible everywhere. So you can walk into Walmart and buy one. You can walk into Chapters, Toys R Us. So, I mean, I think it's influencing culture to the point where, people don't want to necessarily wait. But then you got the same people who have had their comic lists and their comic pull lists at their shops, and they get mad when they get 2 issues showing up in their comic book box because they weren't expecting them, and that's an extra $4, US for them to spend, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know where the balance is on that, but we've released a couple of issues where we've had them very close together, printing issues or whatever, and they've we've had comic shops say, hey, maybe you guys should just stagger these by 2 weeks. Don't have them show up on the same day. Right. And I never thought once about it, because when I was getting my pull list, I was like, cool, bonus, I get to read like 44 pages of comic book this time and get more of it. But apparently there are people that just don't really like that.
Yeah, I mean, and when I was growing up, it was 35 cents, 75 cents, $1.25. Sure, throw an extra one in there, but by the time you get to the late 90s, you're into $3. Then you're in the 2000s is $5.
And up here, a $3.99 book after taxes, if you don't get a discount, is pushed, and your rate conversion is pushing $6.05.
Right. Yeah. What we don't realize, though, is how cool we thought it was in America during the 90s when we started getting all these high-quality papers and high-quality colors, because up until that point, it was all pulp-type magazines. It was all newspaper print kind of stuff, and it was a total different experience. And Everything was
one of the reasons I started reading Image was because the colors and everything else
Yeah,
was so crisp and nice.
yeah,
Oh, so vibrant. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
ratcheted up.
I'm curious, Tony. I feel like we might have had this conversation at Geekonox, but like when you're thinking back to the comics of growing up, like what were your big books, coming up into that turned you into like the comic fan that you are today, that allowed you kind of to get into the job as an editor?
Okay. I've never had that question asked of me, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a good one. I started reading very, very young. I spent a lot of time alone.
Didn't we all?
I did. My dad was in the Navy, so he was always gone, and my mom was always busy. So I spent a lot of time alone. Didn't have a lot of friends that were really super close by, so it was always a bit of a walk or a bike ride to get to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of time with comic books. I'd say I really started with I liked team books more than anything else, and I liked team up books. Mm-hmm. So I really liked Marvel 2-in-1, and I really liked Justice League, and I really liked Avengers. And so anything that I felt I was getting more for my money out of, like, hey, instead of buying one book with just Superman in it, I can buy DC Comics Presents with Superman and Hawkman, So right. I was always really into those. So I would say that what influenced me the most would probably be the team books and the variety of them, and the fact that, for a long time there, they, especially through the 80s and 90s, they would team books to like number 40 and they cancel them, and then like 3 months later you'd have a different book with some of the same characters and they'd be in a team.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You get the most popular characters from book 1 and the most popular characters from book 2 combined to become the new team in book 3. Yeah.
It's like a Voltron of publishing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember one in particular. I think this was Image stuff. There was Strike Force, Cyber Force, and then there was another one. And it
Gen
like
13.
eventually Gen 13, but then eventually Strike Force, it was like the main guy from Cyber Force with 3 arms or 4 arms, and then there was like another, like he had his own little like side crew, and like so. And the next thing you know, you're buying these comics, and you realize that you're the genius of the marketing. It's like, so now I have 6 books to read, because there were 6 members of this team that I really liked, and now each of them have their own team,
right?
with 5 other characters, and it's like, oh my god, it's like a spider web of
it is
of team building, right?
So is that, you think that's because of marketing, or because comic book heroes are like rock musicians and they're always starting a new band?
I think I as much as I'm sure that part of it was like, well, hey, this is doing really well, I would imagine what they say is like, well, it's not that they want to spin it off and do it for just the money, but I would imagine that they get a lot of feedback from fans that are like, oh my god, I can't remember this guy's name. I think his real name, the character's name was Robert Bearclaw, but he had these long talony type claws. He was like Wolverine on steroids. But
that's what you need, Wolverine on steroids.
He was really popular. So he ended up with his own book and his own kind of like team of people like him. Right. In a story. And I would imagine a lot of that is just because he was just like one of the most, just like Wolverine is one of the most popular X-Men, the same idea. This guy's one of the most popular people on Strike Force. And I thought that was, I would imagine that's probably why they did that, is because they wanted to spin off. And I would also think that the artists that were involved, just like, they would have their favorites and they would probably have their own stories. And it was like, well, this doesn't really fit into the team book, but hey, publisher, do you want to maybe do a spin-off or a one-off? And the next thing you know, that I know that you mentioned Gen 13. Mm-hmm. Was Velocity Gen 13, or is that Cyberforce? Do you remember that, Tony?
I think she was Gen 13. I didn't read a lot of those particular books. The stuff that I read from Image, actually, I didn't read very many of the Image team books at all. I was more into like the Savage Dragon. And,
Right. Yeah.
What was his group? I can't think. He had a group of his own. They gave him a group. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was definitely a formula in the 90s. But like Velocity was essentially a cyber enhanced speedster. So she was like a 15-year-old Flash, but cute. Kind of reminded me of like Magan from DC, like the Martian Manhunter, kind of like cousin or whatever. But
she had like a green outfit and a
little
red-haired bob on her.
Red-haired bob, like bob cut, yeah. But it was a really cool little book. I remember really liking it just because she was one of the more appealing characters. Like, she was unsure of herself. But then by giving her own book, they kind of forced her to kind of like be the hero, where she was kind of just part of the team before and always being kind of babysat. And there was some really interesting stuff that they could do. I still have a lot of that stuff. I don't think I ever got rid of the comics. They're in a box somewhere.
Oh, yeah. I do remember her now. She had a bit of a Kitty Pryde vibe to her.
Yeah. Exactly what it sounded like to me. I didn't read that particular series, but yes, Kitty Pryde has always been one of my favorite characters. Spunky character.
So we've covered the past, but I'm kind of curious. I want to ask someone who's actually in the business, where do you think the state of comics will be in 5 years' time?
I think you're going to find, kind of like with craft beers,
Yeah.
equating comic books to craft beer, you're going to see a larger number of smaller publishers bringing stuff to the market, and I think you're going to see the bigger companies. They're basically whittling. We're whittling away at what their market share is now, anyways, because there is a limited number of dollars available for people to purchase books, right? So if you say that number is finite, and there is only this much to be spent and only this much to buy, there has to be somewheres where it's giving. And I think it's being pecked away at from the big guys. The big guys are going to be losing more and more market share. They're going to get more and more in for their movies and their TV shows. I think they're going to start focusing a lot more on that stuff. And I think you're going to see that they're going to try and just sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? They're going to sort of wall off. They're going to have this is the end. This is as far as we go, and we're going to keep this tight-knit group of books in each of the big publishers. That's what I think is going to happen, and you're going to see a lot of smaller publishers coming out and taking their small little nibbles out of the pie, and then you're going to see some of those guys sort of merge and become slightly bigger, smaller companies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That's what I think. I think it's going to be very similar to what's happening, and I know it's a weird way to look at it, but yeah, I think it's gonna be a lot like the craft beer industry,
right?
The regular beer industry. I think it's going to be a lot of independence, and I don't think you're going to see them disappear really quickly, because so long as the paper turns around and starts getting a little bit cheaper now, your printing at larger volumes is fairly decent. If you can get to those numbers, sometimes I think, like I said, you might see some merging of smaller companies to get to those, but you can do runs fairly cheaply if you're doing large runs. So if you can get the distribution like Alterna's doing, they have distribution to like newsstands and corner stores and supermarkets and stuff with their newsprint line.
Right.
So they're printing larger numbers. They're able to use a cheaper paper stock, and I think they're getting them out there for $1.50 US. Now, I mean, they're on newsprint paper, so this is the stuff of the 70s.
Right.
The really cheap textured paper, but they're getting it out everywhere. So they're able to know that they are selling X number. They can do larger print runs and lowers their cost. So
and they might be getting
in that aspect.
Yeah, they might be getting ahead of the curve, because in the last 2 months alone, I think I've seen no less than 6 Kickstarters for turntables, for vinyl turntables, and then you're just like, but if they get out there and people start thinking like, well, look, I already spend so much for this stuff. Like if I want to spend more for something really glossy, I will. But if all I want to do is just read the story, eventually there's going to be a dollar value on that. That's going to become a non-decision purchase. But it's like, yeah, that's half the cost of a latte at Starbucks. I will totally buy that, to read a comic book. And I think that it's one of those things that, you have to find that kind of sweet spot. And at some point, either the material that it's printed on doesn't matter, or it ends up with that retro vibe. And I mean, all it takes is just a couple of key communities to think it's cool and bring it in there, and then all of a sudden you can't predict it, unfortunately. You just kind of have to throw enough retro spaghetti at the wall and hope it sticks.
Retro spaghetti.
But to what you said about the smaller companies, I'm seeing a lot of the artists that we've interviewed on this show in the last 6 months. I think I've noticed at least one a month of Kickstarters that have started going up, from people that are doing their second book, they're doing their second art book or their second graphic novel, or things like that, where they're taking their webcomics and the other things that we've talked to them about, and they're now printing them on their own. And I mean, it's on a very small scale. they're able to get their books out there to the numbers that matter. And even a company can use Kickstarter to kind of get things off the ground, and I think that opens up the floodgates. And I mean, competition is great. It means that printers are going to have to lower their costs to stay competitive, in order to kind of get in there. And I'm not saying it's going to be drastic, but like eventually you kind of have to say like, okay, like I know when I was doing research for my own stuff that, anything less than 1,000 copies, you're better off waiting until you can get to that number. And that's when the cost of making the thing drops dramatically. And you're no longer looking at like, 40 to 50% profit off the book. You're looking at more like a 60 to 70% profit off of like the physical cost of making it versus what you're selling it. And I mean, and if you multiply that over your numbers, when you look at your long-term, income, it's a huge difference. So patience is definitely key. I'm wondering if we're gonna see the same boom in Halifax for comics that we've seen in craft beer, because I would be okay with that. Fun stat for anybody listening. Halifax, if not Nova Scotia, has the largest amount of craft beer breweries per capita in the country.
Yeah.
Like for our population, we have the most.
Interesting.
I think you're right on both counts. I think it's the largest in Halifax and in the province
and in the province as well. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
We all better get to drinking. That's all I got to say. Somebody's got to drink all of that.
Already there.
But back to that note, like you're talking, you had asked about where I think everything's going. What we think it's going to be doing, and what we're trying to sort of change our market to is to have a lower entry point. So we have volume ones, like our volume ones for our series as they come out. They're only going to be $9.99. It doesn't matter if it's 4 issues or 5 issues. It's going to be a $9.99 book. We want to keep it below that $10 mark, because you can't, not everybody's going to go and pull the trigger on a $19.95 book just because they just aren't. But at $9.99 for 100 pages of story,
I'll do that. I'm in it.
Yeah, I do that all day long. No problem.
Absolutely.
As long as it looks good. I mean, it's, if you're not sure, as long as it looks good and, you can get into the art, or there's, maybe there's a name on it that you recognize.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to pull that trigger. You may not on something that's twice as much. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to get our stuff into, lower priced volumes that people can start with and hopefully get interested in buying the books.
Yeah, it's cheaper than a movie ticket.
Yep. I think now is a good time for Matthew to ask the last question, because I think it'll be time for you to pimp some of your. People still use pimp. I couldn't figure out a word. What's another word? Promote. How about plug? Promote.
This will be kind of an interesting way to ask this question, because he's got kind of so many kids, so to speak.
Right.
It's a little bit like asking, who's your favorite kid sort of thing. But you know what? Let's ask it anyway. Who are some artists that we should be following?
Oh, my. I should have went over I should have looked and seen this note in there.
Right. No, just you could just
gut reaction.
You can just name your people.
I am a very big fan of Mike Ruth. Mike Ruth has done covers for us. He's done a couple of interior stories, short stories for us, but he's also worked on what's the name of the comic company?
Hold on, I'll get it.
He's been doing some covers for, right on the tip of my tongue.
Lightfoot? No. Let me see.
No, it's not Alterna. It's another one like that. Crap.
Ah, here it is. Found him. Baby Teeth.
Yeah, he's been doing it for that company.
Right.
I'm gonna tip my tongue. Sorry, Mike, if you're listening.
No. He can't. We shocked him with this. Includes the Frankie Comics. It's an Aftershock. Aftershock comic. Aftershock. So there we go.
He's been doing some covers for Aftershock. He's done covers for.
Ooh, those Dynamite are cool.
And Dark Horse. He's done covers for. He's done covers for Red Sonja and Conan, and he's big on Vikings. His work is beautiful. There's one guy to keep an eye on. It's definitely Mike Ruth. I also really enjoy Jason Liu, who does Pitiful Human Lizard for us.
Mm-hmm.
He has this. It has a bit of a little bit of a throwback feel. Like his Pitiful Human Lizard is fantastic. It's funny. It's my wife's favorite story, but don't let Jason hear this because his head will blow. It will just get bigger.
Right.
I also really enjoy. Boy, it's so hard to narrow it down. I know I only have a minute. Or two left.
No, you're good. We're not going to hurry you up.
Yeah.
That's
Just to kind of help with the narrowing process. Do you have a female artist that we can look into?
Yeah, Bella Racklin. She's doing the covers on Agents of Pact, which is our all-female superhero team. It's 4 parts. It started earlier this year. I think it's issue 3 is due to come out soon. It'll go to issue 4, and then it'll go on hiatus for a little bit. It's supposed to have been a series that sort of bridges the Captain Canuck series.
Right.
So Bella does the covers on those. Federica Manfredi does the interiors, and they are beautiful. She's done work on Star Trek, but Federica is probably my go-to. I picked her for that book, and she's fantastic. It looks gorgeous.
Love it.
Nice.
I'm digging all this stuff. I have plenty of stuff to look at now. The Pitiful Human Lizard. I have not seen this one at all, but I need to check it out. I do like the retro. Oh, it's sold out. What should I do? Wait longer,
Brian.
Brian.
Back in stock soon.
Right.
We sold off the last few in the last couple of weeks, so we're in the middle of a replacement print run.
Right.
So it's coming. But no, Pitiful Human Lizard is great. Die Kitty Die, probably my favorite series that we do.
Right.
I'm involved in the second series of that, which is Die Kitty Die, Hollywood or Bust. And that's by the Archie guys, Dan Parent and Fernando Ruiz. If you pick up an Archie comic in the last 20 years, it's probably got a cover by one of those two guys on it. Yes. And stories inside of it by them. So they're the Archie guys.
Right.
But they have Die Kitty Die, which is their creator-owned project.
Right. Now we have the Archie Digest comics, and they'll sell them like when I go to Publix, which is one of our grocery chains here in the U.S. And I'm always tempted to pick up one, but then I see the price. And I'm like, I can't afford $10. I'll have to put back food. And so I have to make that decision.
Yeah, it depends on the book. They have double digest and jumbo digest. They have the 1,000 pagers. And
oh my God,
pages.
They're definitely worth it because you will be doing some reading because those things are thick. And but unfortunately, they always hit me up as I'm trying to buy food for my family, who is starving and waiting on me to get home. And I'm like, this is not the time to tempt me, Archie. Maybe later we'll talk on Amazon.
My daughter's a big fan. She has boxes and boxes of Archie comics in there.
Yeah.
And since Dan and Fernando are friends, and Giselle Lagasse, who's also an Archie artist, and Jay Torres, they're all friends now.
Right.
Since I've gotten into the business, they always make sure that I have books for Ella whenever I come. That's my oldest daughter who's into Archies. They always make sure I have books for her whenever I meet up with them. It's great. She just absorbs it. She just loves it.
Right. Love it. Tony, tell us where people can follow you on the internet one last time.
One last time. I am at Canuck Tony on Twitter. You can find Chapterhouse at Chapterhouse CA on Twitter. You can find it on Instagram at Chapterhouse Publishing. And you can find it on Facebook, Chapterhouse Comics, I believe. I don't know if they would change. I don't know if they changed it to Chapterhouse Publishing yet.
Right.
They were going to, and there may have been something that held that up. I'm not sure if there was another Chapterhouse Publishing on there.
I got to check out the Instagram.
Still under Chapterhouse Comics. So it's Chapterhouse Publishing on Instagram, Chapterhouse Comics on Facebook, and at Chapterhouse CA on Twitter. And I'm at Canuck Tony on Twitter.
Excellent. Tony, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We appreciate all the knowledge you brought to the table, the entertainment that you brought to the table. That mental picture I have of you as Captain Canuck in the Captain Canuck costume. Thank you for that.
Those are easy to find.
Right. So thank you so much for being on the show tonight. Joel Duggan, where can people find you?
2 places. You can check me out on Twitter and Instagram with just my name, Joel Duggan. You can also find Forge Publishing by its name on Twitter and Instagram. Those are going to be the best ways to find out what's going on with me. I'm going to be at Dartmouth Comic Arts Festival, as Tony said, actually with Tony, in 3 weeks. And the daily paintings book from Piper Thibodeau is shipping. So we are 100% done. It is in the hands of the mighty capable Dave Michael from Sales Geek. So people should be expecting their books in roughly 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how far away
Excellent.
you live from the U.S. So yeah, exciting stuff.
That is exciting. Matthew Ducharme, where can people see you?
Best place to see my work is just to go to YouTube and do a search for my name or for Matt the Wad.
Excellent. You can follow me at the Brian Dunaway on Twitter. Best place to find me. Follow everything we do at Comics C2C on Twitter. If you would like to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/Comics C2C. We do appreciate all the support we get. I think that's about it. I think that's going to be a show. Thank you guys once again, and we'll see you next week.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Comics Coast to Coast. This is my voice.